Welcome to Energy and Infrastructure from Ulteig, a podcast focused on technology, innovation, policy, and funding. Our podcast discusses the hot issues facing our industry today, interviewing experts, CEOs, elected officials, and the disruptors making an impact in our industry. I'm your host, Aaron Lauinger, Market Director at Ulteig. Thank you for joining us today as we kick off our 8-part series where we dive into the possibility of a 4th or 5th stimulus package that may include significant infrastructure funding in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the course of this series, we'll interview industry experts, government leaders, CEOs, and board members. Our discussions will focus on getting the infrastructure stimulus package right and the opportunity to kickstart our economy and modernize our nation's infrastructure across what Ulteig calls the lifeline sectors: power, renewables, transportation, and water. For our first episode, my goal is to offer a lessons learned from the 2009 American Recovery and Reinvestment Act and provide insights as well as provoke thinking on how to be well prepared and positioned for a possible stimulus release. As a note, this is not an editorial on politics, politicians, or what should or should not be in the stimulus package. My intent is to offer information and data so that we can all be well positioned for the future. I suspect there are things I will say that you agree with, and things I will offer that you disagree with. Either way, I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this podcast, and ultimately, I hope this starts a lively conversation, learning from each other and enriching the discussion. We all know this pandemic is wreaking havoc on the American people and our economy. I think everyone listening knows at least someone that's been impacted. Congress has passed 3 stimulus packages totaling over $4 trillion with the intent to shore up our economy and provide relief to the everyday American. The stimulus packages Congress has put out thus far have been designed to provide some short-term security to a lot of businesses and put some of the income lost due to the pandemic back in the pockets of Americans. The reality of the situation is that $1,200 to $2,400 is not going to go far, and jobs are going to be necessary. 3 weeks ago, the U.S. Employment and Training Administration recorded unemployment claims at 3.2 million. 2 weeks ago, it doubled and went to 6.6 million. This last week, it was over 16 million. On top of that, J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon sent a letter to shareholders where he said that he expects the GDP to plunge at a 35% annual rate in Q2, and that unemployment will spike as high as 14%. We also heard from former chair of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen. She echoed the same prediction, forecasting a 30% contraction of the economy and unemployment at 13%. To put those 16 million unemployment cases filed last week into perspective, in 2009 there were approximately 650,000 cases, with unemployment peaking at 9.5%. Full disclosure, I'm an engineer, not an economist, but it doesn't take an economist to tell you that we're staring down the barrel of some tough financial times. Now, history has shown us that creating jobs in recessions and spurring consumer spending can pull the economy out of a recession. An infrastructure stimulus package will be imperative for the rebound of jobs. Let's jump back circa February 2009. America is coming out of what would later be known as the Great Recession. In response, Congress passes the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. And for the sake of not adding another 5 minutes to this podcast, if I say it in its entirety every time, I'm going to refer to it as the Recovery Act. The Recovery Act was a response to promote economic recovery and growth, which included tax cuts, it extended unemployment benefits, and provided funding for both education and healthcare. Sounds very similar to the packages that have been passed thus far. There were 2 other measures that were part of that '09 Recovery Act bill, and they were designed to modernize our nation's infrastructure and enhance energy independence. Or the real point, create jobs to spur consumer spending and pull the nation out of recession. We'll get back to that in a minute. So, for the most part, D.C. seems to be in tune. We know that our nation's infrastructure is in dire need of help, and our economy is going to be in dire need of jobs. Last week, President Trump tweeted, and note, I do realize this is one of over 14,000 tweets since he's been president, but it's part of the conversation. And as a short to the tweet he sent, in summary, President Trump says, now is the perfect time for a $2 trillion infrastructure bill. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi outlined an infrastructure proposal based on a 5-year, $760 billion framework, where then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell suggested Congress wait and see how the first three stimulus packages fare, but as you may have heard, is now in favor of the fourth stimulus package, and by my estimation will also probably be in favor of a infrastructure package in the fifth one. In essence, we have both sides of the aisle talking and coming to the start of a consensus about infrastructure projects to help the U.S. recover from the pandemic's destruction. And we're somewhere between $750 billion and $2 trillion. And it's not just D.C. that is talking. I've seen correspondence from multiple state agencies requesting project lists that will be ready to go this summer, and literally with the next day submittal deadlines. Why do you think state agencies are requesting, almost begging, to give them lists of projects that are ready to go this summer? It's because they remember. They remember what happened in 2009 with the Recovery Act. The 2009 Recovery Act allocated $275 billion in federal contracts, grants, and loans as part of two measures that were designed to modernize our nation's infrastructure and enhance energy independence. Let's talk about modernizing our nation's infrastructure first, starting with transportation. In 2009, federal and state spending on transportation was $82 billion, with a $54 billion unfilled need. The 2009 Recovery Act allocated an additional $14 billion. Modernizing our transportation infrastructure doesn't go very far when you're talking about a 9% investment, especially when you look at the condition of our transportation infrastructure today and know that Senate Bill 2302, America's Transportation Infrastructure Act of 2019, proposed $287 billion. And we're not even talking about the highway trust funds looming insolvency. It isn't so much the funding levels that everyone remembers, though. It was the provisions attached to the stimulus funding. The Recovery Act was passed in February of 2009, and one of the provisions of the monies distributed through the federal highway to surface transportation projects, agencies like DOT and local government, the provision was that 50% of the funds had to be allocated by June 30th of 2009. We're talking within 4 months. The intent was good. The intent was to put the money to work right away to generate jobs. But the result was entirely opposite. All of a sudden, you have Federal Highway throwing this money at DOTs, telling them to allocate it within 4 months. Now, again, not the economist, I'm the engineer. Understand, in order to allocate the funds, a project has to be designed, cleared, approved, and bid. So think about modernizing our infrastructure, improving congestion, reducing fatalities. Projects that come to my mind would include major interstates, highways and bridges, all across our nation. But those projects take a year, if not years, to study, plan, environmentally clear, design, and permit. There was no way the state and local agencies were going to be able to deliver modernized infrastructure. But DOTs were not going to churn away the money, no. They were going to find projects they could get, if you remember this, shovel ready in 4 months. And those were all pavement projects, mill and overlays, Band-Aids over our existing infrastructure. Now, there were a few agencies that had, another good term for you that you might remember, shelf-ready projects, and were really able to put that money to work. But for the majority, most of the money went to pavement projects. It's estimated that the bill generated approximately 300,000 jobs. The water infrastructure modernization went about the same way. The 2009 Recovery Act allocated $6 billion through the EPA to the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. The Clean Water and Drinking Water Funds were established back in the 70s. A little history for you. And they were designed to provide loan programs to local government to enhance both deteriorating water and wastewater systems. So, give you a little process with the history. Typically, a local government municipality applies for a subrate loan through the federal program. They are then given points based on the severity of the infrastructure and the risk to public health. The more points you have, the worse your system is, and the more likely you'll be able to use that for the year's allocation of federal loans. The Recovery Act was significant for the Clean Water Fund. $4 billion was added to the $700 million budget, and $2 billion was added to the $1.6 billion budget of the drinking water. As a side note, a sidebar here, today, the EPA has identified $743 billion in needs for water infrastructure improvements across our entire nation. Gives you a little perspective. So just like the surface transportation stimulus, it wasn't about the allocations. It was about the provisions. As the Recovery Act was passed in February of 2009, one provision that was included required 50% of the funds be allocated within 120 days. Here's that 4 months again. Again, the intent was good, but the result did not meet expectation. Just like highways and bridges, you have to go through the same process on water and wastewater facilities. The other caveat on this one, because of how the state revolving funds work, if your local government did not apply and get on the list the September prior, so we're talking September of 2008, you were not going to be eligible for funds. The remaining 50% of the funds that were not allocated in the first 120 days then had to be allocated within that year. So we're talking by February of 2010. Now, the other provision in the bill required that 50% of the funds would be subsidized, which included grants, principal forgiveness, and negative interest. The result was, if you were on the list, if you got on the list in September of 2008, if you had a shovel-ready project, you pretty much received a grant for the entire cost of your improvement because it was difficult for the state revolving fund to meet the 120-day provision. It was like hitting the lottery for these small to medium-sized communities. At the same time, you saw a mad rush of all the other communities try to get on the list, hoping to get enough points to benefit from the remaining 50% of the funds. But there wasn't necessarily enough to go around to meet the demand anymore. And not because of the state agencies administering the program for the EPA, but because of the provisions Congress put in the 2009 Recovery Act. In both the transportation and water allocations from the Recovery Act, a few communities and agencies really benefited, some jobs were created, and for the most part, our transportation and water infrastructure was not modernized. So let's talk about the other measure, the measure that was designed to enhance the nation's energy independence. The 2009 Recovery Act provided more than $90 billion to renewable energy. This helped catalyze substantial shifts towards renewable energy sources, raising efficiency, building infrastructure for large-scale use of renewable energy, and of course, job creation. It also leveraged $150 billion in private capital for renewables. The Recovery Act supported a significant drop in technology costs. Since 2008, utility-scale solar PV installations have fallen over 70%, while domestically manufactured wind turbines went from 25% to over 75%. The Recovery Act appropriated more than $10 billion to modernize the electric grid through the Smart Grid Investment Program, installing over 16 million smart meters. Today, there are over 70 million smart meters installed. It worked to enhance the efficiency of the U.S. energy infrastructure and ensure more reliable electricity delivery, largely through the smart grid projects and interconnection transmission planning. Now realize, this was implemented over the course of 3 years, not somewhere between 120 and 180 days. What was the difference, besides the time? Well, I said previously 300,000 jobs between water and transportation. The power and renewable side of the Recovery Act generated over 3 million jobs. I want to share a familiar quote from philosopher George Santayana. You may know it more famously by Winston Churchill. Those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. You see, I think there's a unique opportunity for lessons learned from the 2009 Recovery Act. The Recovery Act demonstrated how investment in our infrastructure can truly incubate and modernize our nation's infrastructure. And it also demonstrated how the same investment can be entirely lost and exasperated. In 2009, transportation technology and innovation was not on the same horizon it is today. The opportunities to do something really great with our nation's infrastructure, from multimodal systems to smart streets and cities to connected vehicles to electric and autonomous vehicles to even dreams of rapid transit through maglev technology. But it also doesn't have to be all technology. We know that the cost of maintaining our infrastructure is 3 times the cost of its capital cost. We can't continue to build our way out of congestion and fatalities. Transportation Systems Management and Operations, also known as TSMO, it has a proven set of strategies that focus on operational improvements that can maintain and even restore the performance of existing transportation systems, well before additional capacity is needed. There is an opportunity to make our communities safer, more resilient to flooding, natural disasters, to prevent the water crises like the tragedy in Flint, to harden and secure our power grids and enhance the carbon capture and reduction of our power providers, all while continuing the investment in alternative energy sources. We have an opportunity to truly modernize our infrastructure, an opportunity to bring millions of high-paying jobs to Americans and kickstart this economy again. But we can't do it in a vacuum, and we surely can't do it in 120 days. We have to do it right, we have to do it for our generation, and we have to do it for our future generations. In conclusion, some of you listening may have learned a little more about the history you've heard of, while others remember living that history in 2009. Either way, I believe there are valuable lessons learned from the 2009 Recovery Act that will better position us for another infrastructure stimulus package. If I could offer 3 key takeaways: number 1, start now to be shelf and shovel ready. Whether funding has to be allocated in 120 days or 2 years, the bottom line is you need a project to benefit from infrastructure stimulus. Number 2, establish a fast-track process for complex projects as much as feasibly possible. Don't push the easy button and grab for mill and overlays. It's about being smart and leveraging your partner network and what you already know. Invest in your infrastructure. Truly modernize your infrastructure. And number 3, know your priorities. Refresh the 10-year plans. What is on there that you didn't think was possible in the next year or two? Open your minds to possibilities. Challenge the ingenuity of your teams and have your partner network ready and standing with you. We all want to be at the start line, ready to run the stimulus race. Thank you for listening. Share our podcast and don't forget to subscribe to catch our next episode as our series continues to track the stimulus packages and we provide in-depth interviews with industry leaders and experts. Check us out at ulteig.com where we listen, we solve.